The morning frost clung to the grass like shattered glass, each blade catching the pale sunlight that barely penetrated the thick canopy of pine trees surrounding Fort Blackwood's sniper training facility. The air carried the sharp scent of cordite, mixed with damp earth and the metallic tang of rifle oil. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic crack of gunfire echoed across the valley, punctuated by the bark of drill instructors and the crunch of boots on gravel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Vasquez pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she approached the main training building. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air, and her fingers were already stiff despite the thin gloves she wore. The other candidates had arrived earlier, their expensive gear bags and pristine uniforms making her feel like an outsider before she'd even step foot in the door. She carried everything she owned in a single duffel bag that had seen better days, the fabric patched in several places with duct tape. The building loomed ahead, its concrete walls painted in military green with narrow windows that reflected nothing but shadow. A sign hung above the entrance reading, "Precision Marksmanship Academy, Excellence Through Discipline." Elena paused. At the threshold, her hand resting on the cold metal door handle, this was it. 3 months of training that would either make her career or end it before it truly began. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across polished floors that smelled of disinfectant and boot polish. The main briefing room was already half full when Elena entered, and she could feel the weight of stairs following her as she found an empty seat near the back. The other candidates were mostly men, their postures confident and voices carrying the easy camaraderie of those who belonged. They wore their credentials like armor, discussing their military backgrounds and shooting achievements with the casual authority of proven warriors. Elena had none of that. She was 26 years old, a former retail worker from a small town in Arizona who had joined the military only 18 months ago. While others spoke of special forces training and combat deployments, she quietly unpacked her notebook and waited for the briefing to begin. Her hands were steady despite the nervous energy that coursed through her veins. These hands had once stocked shelves and operated cash registers, but they had also spent countless hours at her grandfather's ranch learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts with an old hunting rifle that kicked like a mule. Master Sergeant William Kane entered the room like a force of nature, his presence immediately commanding absolute silence. He was a man carved from granite, with silver hair cropped short and eyes that seemed to catalog every weakness in the room with a single glance. His uniform was immaculate, decorated with ribbons that told stories of conflicts most people only read about in history books. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood and sacrifice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, though his gaze lingered on Elena for a moment longer than the others, "welcome to the most challenging 3 months of your military careers. This is not basic training. This is not a game. This is where we separate those who can pull a trigger from those who can change the course of history with a single shot." He began pacing in front of the assembled candidates, his boots clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that seemed to match Elena's heartbeat. "Look around you. 12 of you entered this program. Statistics tell us that only 4 will graduate. The rest will return to their units with a new appreciation for just how difficult this job really is." Elena's eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of her fellow candidates. There was Marcus Chun, a former Marine who had served 2 tours in the Middle East and spoke in technical terms about ballistics and wind drift. James Rodriguez sat beside him, a Army Ranger whose confidence bordered on arrogance as he discussed his extensive combat experience. Near the front, Sarah Thompson, the only other woman in the program, wore her Special Forces background like a badge of honor, her equipment pristine and her posture radiating competence. The modern sniper, Kane continued, is not a Hollywood creation. You will not be lone wolves operating in the shadows. You are precision instruments in a complex machine, capable of delivering surgical strikes that can save hundreds of lives, or eliminate threats that conventional forces cannot reach. But first, you must prove that you have what it takes to earn that responsibility. He stopped directly in front of Elena's seat, his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, her spine straight and her hands folded calmly in her lap. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to interpret, before he moved on. Your first evaluation begins in 30 minutes. Draw your equipment from supply and report to Range Alpha. Those of you who cannot achieve a grouping of less than 2 inches at 300 yards will be dismissed immediately. No second chances, no excuses. As the briefing ended and candidates began filing out, Elena heard the whispered conversations that followed in her wake. The words were not meant for her ears, but in the enclosed space, they carried clearly enough. What's she even doing here? Marcus muttered to James as they walked ahead of her. This isn't a hobby course. People are going to die if someone can't handle the pressure. Probably some diversity initiative, James replied with a slight laugh. Give it a week. She wash out once she realizes this isn't target practice at the county fair. Sarah Thompson turned slightly, her voice carrying a note of false sympathy. I mean, I admire her for trying, but realistically, what kind of background could she possibly have? The military's great about giving people opportunities, but some jobs require actual experience. Elena kept walking, her face betraying nothing of the words that cut deeper than she cared to admit. She had heard variations of this conversation her entire life. First in high school when she tried out for the shooting team, then in basic training when she had outperformed half her unit on the rifle range. People saw her unremarkable appearance and quiet demeanor and assumed she was trying to prove something she couldn't deliver. The supply building was a maze of shelves stocked with equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology. Elena waited in line behind the other candidates, listening to them discuss the merits of different rifle systems and optics with the easy familiarity of experts. When her turn came, the supply sergeant, a weathered man with tired eyes, barely looked up from his paperwork. Name? He asked, his pencil poised over a clipboard. Vasquez Elena, private first class. He found her name on the roster and began pulling equipment from the shelves behind him. The rifle he handed her was a Remington 700, chambered in .308 Winchester, its black synthetic stock showing signs of use but well maintained. The scope was a Leupold Mark IV, clear glass in a sturdy mounting system that had been zeroed and re-zeroed countless times. A bipod was attached to the front sling swivel, and a drag bag completed the basic kit. This is your responsibility now, the sergeant said, his tone suggesting he had given this speech many times before. You break it, you buy it. You lose it, you're out. This equipment is worth more than most people make in a year, so treat it accordingly. Elena nodded, accepting the rifle with both hands. The weight was familiar, though different from the hunting rifles she had grown up with. This was a precision instrument, every component designed for a specific purpose. She checked the action, noting the smooth bolt travel and clean trigger brake. The scope mounts were tight, and the bipod deployed smoothly. It was a good rifle, one that would perform, as well as the person behind it. Outside, Range Alpha stretched across a valley that had been sculpted by decades of training exercises. Target berms rose at various distances, with shooting positions constructed from timber and sandbags. The 300-yard line was marked by a series of concrete benches, each equipped with spotting scopes and wind flags that hung limp in the still morning air. Elena claimed a position near the end of the line, away from the clusters of candidates who had already begun setting up their equipment. She spread her shooting mat, a simple piece of canvas that had seen better days, and began the process of establishing her firing position. The bipod legs were adjusted for the uneven ground, and she settled behind the rifle, her body finding the natural point of aim that her grandfather had taught her years ago. The targets at 300 yards were standard bullseye patterns, black circles on white paper that would reveal every flaw in technique or equipment. Elena adjusted her scope, turning the focusing ring until the target appeared crisp and clear. She worked the bolt, chambering a round from the box of match-grade ammunition they had been issued. The brass was bright and new, each cartridge loaded to precise specifications. From her left, she could hear Marcus discussing ballistics with James, their conversation peppered with technical terms and confident assertions about wind drift and elevation adjustments. Sarah Thompson was methodically checking her equipment, her movements efficient and practiced. The other candidates displayed varying degrees of competence, but all of them seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Elena simply breathed. She let her body relax into the familiar rhythm of shooting, feeling the rise and fall of her chest as she found her natural respiratory pause. The crosshairs settled on the center of the target, and she began her mental checklist. Sight picture clear. Trigger finger positioned correctly. Body alignment natural. Breathing controlled. Master Sergeant Kane's voice cut through the morning. Air like a blade. Commence firing, 10 rounds. You have 20 minutes. The first shot broke clean, the rifle recoiling straight back into her shoulder. Through the scope, she could see the bullet hole appear in the paper, just slightly high and to the right of center. She made a minor adjustment to her hold and fired again. This time the shot was closer, and the third round found the center of the bull's eye. Around her, the other candidates were firing at their own pace, some fast and confident, others more deliberate. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley, a continuous percussion that would have been overwhelming to untrained ears. Elena shut out the noise and focused on her target, her breathing steady and her trigger control consistent. By the 7th round, she had found her rhythm. The rifle seemed to be an extension of her body, responding to the slightest adjustment in her hold or breathing. Each shot broke at the same point in her respiratory cycle, and the bullets grouped tightly around the center of the target. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She fired her final 3 rounds with increasing confidence, each one adding to a cluster that would have made her grandfather proud. When the ceasefire was called, Elena safed her rifle and waited for the targets to be retrieved. The other candidates were already discussing their performance, some with satisfaction and others with concern. Marcus had shot well, his target showing a tight group slightly left of center. James had struggled with his first few shots but recovered too. Produce a respectable grouping. Sarah Thompson's target displayed the kind of precision that came from extensive training and natural ability. Elena's target came back with a cluster of holes that could have been covered by a silver dollar. The group was centered perfectly in the bull's eye, with no flyers or obvious mistakes. It was not the best target of the day, but it was solid. Workmanlike shooting that demonstrated both competence and consistency. Master Sergeant Kane examined each target without comment, his expression revealing nothing of his assessment. When he reached Elena's target, he studied it for a moment longer than the others, then moved on without acknowledgement. She had passed the first test, but there was no sense of celebration. This was merely the beginning. The afternoon brought classroom instruction on advanced ballistics, environmental factors, and target identification. Elena took careful notes, absorbing information about wind drift, barometric pressure, and temperature effects on bullet trajectory. Much of it was new to her, technical knowledge that went far beyond the intuitive shooting she had learned as a child. She asked few questions, preferring to listen and learn rather than draw attention to her lack of formal training. During a break between classes, she found herself alone in the hallway while the other candidates gathered in small groups to discuss the material. Their conversations were animated, filled with references to previous courses and shared experiences that she couldn't relate to. She was about to return to the classroom when she overheard a conversation that made her stop. "I don't know why they even let people like her in," a voice said from around the corner. Elena recognized it as belonging to David Walsh, a former infantry soldier who had struggled with the morning's shooting exercise. "This is supposed to be elite training, not some feel-good program." "Come on," another voice replied. "She shot well today. Maybe she's got some natural talent." "Natural talent?" David laughed bitterly. "This isn't about talent. It's about experience, training, and the ability to perform under pressure. When bullets are flying and people are dying, you want someone who's been there before, not some small-town girl who learned to shoot rabbits." Elena stepped around the corner, her face composed despite the anger that flared in her chest. The group of candidates fell silent, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to defiance. David Walsh's face reddened, but he didn't back down. "Something you want to say, Vasquez?" he challenged. Elena met his gaze steadily. "Just wondering if you plan to spend as much time practicing as you do talking," she replied quietly. "Because from what I saw this morning, you might need it." The group dispersed awkwardly, leaving Elena alone in the hallway. She had made her point, but she knew it would cost her. In a community as small as the sniper school, word would spread quickly about the exchange. She would be marked as someone who didn't know her place, someone who thought she could stand toe-to-toe with more experienced soldiers. That evening, Elena sat on her bunk in the barracks, cleaning her rifle with the methodical care her grandfather had taught her. The other candidates had gone to the common room to watch television and share stories about their military careers. She preferred the solitude, the quiet rhythm of maintenance that helped her think through the day's events. The rifle came apart easily, each component fitting together with the precision of fine engineering. She cleaned the bolt face, inspected the barrel for fouling, and checked the scope mounts for any sign of looseness. It was meditative work, requiring attention to detail, but allowing her mind to wander. She thought about her grandfather, Miguel Vasquez, who had taught her to shoot on his ranch outside Tucson. He had been a quiet man, a veteran of Vietnam who rarely spoke about his military service, but had passed on his knowledge through patient instruction and gentle correction. He had taught her that shooting was not about power or dominance, but about patience, discipline, and respect for the weapon. A rifle is a tool, he had told her when she was 12 years old, struggling to hit a tin can at 50 yards. It will do exactly what you tell it to do, no more and no less. If you miss, it's not the rifle's fault, it's yours. Learn from it and do better next time. Those words had stayed with her through high school, through college, and through the difficult decision to join the military after her grandfather's death. She had enlisted not for adventure or glory, but because she wanted to serve something larger than herself. The sniper school represented the ultimate test of the skills he had taught her, and she was determined not to let his memory down. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah Thompson stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She was still in her uniform, though she had loosened her collar and removed her boots. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her blue eyes held an intensity that suggested she had come here for a specific purpose. "Mind if I come in?" Sarah asked. Elena gestured to the empty chair beside her desk. Sarah entered and closed the door behind her, then sat down with the careful movements of someone who is used to being watched and evaluated. "I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier," Sarah said without preamble. "The comments about your background, that wasn't fair." Elena continued cleaning her rifle, her hands steady as she worked. "I've heard worse." "I'm sure you have, but that doesn't make it right." Sarah leaned forward slightly. Look, I know what it's like to be underestimated. I've had to fight for every opportunity I've gotten, and I've made mistakes along the way. One of those mistakes was assuming that everyone who looks different from me doesn't belong here. Elena looked up from her rifle, meeting Sarah's gaze. What changed your mind? You're shooting today. That group at 300 yards wasn't luck, it was skill, and skill comes from practice. Lots of practice. Sarah paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I've been through a lot of training programs, and I've learned to recognize the difference between someone who's trying to prove a point and someone who's genuinely dedicated to the craft. Elena nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. I appreciate that. There's something else, Sarah continued. The others are starting to notice your performance, and not all of them are happy about it. Some of them have a lot invested in the idea that this job requires a certain type of person, and your presence here challenges that assumption. Elena resumed her cleaning, her movements deliberate and practiced. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you watch your back. The training is going to get harder, and the pressure is going to increase. Some people might try to make it even harder for you, hoping you'll crack. Sarah stood up, smoothing her uniform. But if you can handle the pressure, if you can prove yourself when it really matters, you'll earn respect that no one can take away from you. After Sarah left, Elena finished cleaning her rifle and prepared for sleep. The barracks was quiet. Now the other candidates having returned to their bunks. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of men adjusting to military life, the rustle of sheets, and the occasional cough or whispered conversation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her ability and resolve. She knew that. Some of her fellow candidates were already writing her off, waiting for her to fail so they could confirm their assumptions about who belonged in this elite program. But Elena had learned long ago that other people's expectations were just noise, distractions from the real work of becoming the best she could be. She closed her eyes and thought about the morning shooting exercise, replaying each shot in her mind. The rifle had felt right in her hands, the scope had been clear, and her breathing had been controlled. She had shot well, but she knew it was only the beginning. The real tests were still ahead, and she would need every bit of skill and determination she possessed to meet them. The second day dawned gray and overcast, with a wind that cut through the valley like a knife. Elena woke before the alarm, her internal clock adjusted to the rhythm of military life. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her movements automatic and efficient. The other candidates were beginning to stir, their voices low and gravelly. In the early morning hour, breakfast was a subdued affair, the reality of the program settling in as the candidates contemplated the challenges ahead. Elena ate mechanically, fueling her body for the day's demands rather than seeking comfort in food. She had learned in basic training that military food was sustenance, not cuisine, and she approached it with the same practical mindset she brought to everything else. The morning's instruction focused on environmental factors and their effects. On bullet trajectory, Master Sergeant Kane stood before a whiteboard covered with formulas and diagrams, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned these lessons through experience rather than textbooks. "Wind is your enemy," he began, his marker squeaking against the board as he drew arrows and calculations. "It will push your bullet off course, and the effects increase with distance. At 500 yards, a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind will move your bullet approximately 16 inches. At 1,000 yards, that same wind will move it more than 5 feet. Elena took careful notes, trying to reconcile the technical information with her intuitive understanding of wind effects. Her grandfather had taught her to read the wind through observation, watching grass and leaves and feeling the air movement on her skin. This was more scientific, more precise, but the underlying principle was the same. Temperature affects your bullet's velocity, Kane continued. Cold air is denser, which means more drag and a lower point of impact. Hot air is thinner, which means less drag and a higher point of impact. A 40-degree temperature change can move your bullet 6 inches at 500 yards. The lesson continued with discussions of barometric pressure, humidity, and altitude effects. Each factor could influence bullet trajectory, and the successful sniper had to account for all of them when making a shot. Elena found herself thinking about the desert where she had grown up, with its extreme temperature variations and unpredictable winds. Perhaps her background was more relevant than she had realized. The afternoon brought their first field exercise, a stalk and observation mission that would test their ability to move undetected through terrain and identify targets at long range. Elena was paired with Marcus Chen, the former Marine who had questioned her presence in the program. His attitude toward her was professional but distant, making it clear that he considered her a liability rather than a partner. They were given a sector to observe, a hillside approximately 800 yards away, where instructors would place targets for them to identify and range. The exercise would last 4 hours, and they would be evaluated on their ability to remain hidden while gathering intelligence on enemy positions. Elena followed Marcus as he led them through the pine forest that bordered the training area. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, his steps careful and deliberate as he navigated through the undergrowth. Elena matched his pace, her own movements quiet and economical. She had learned to move through the desert without disturbing the wildlife, and those skills translated well to the forested terrain. They established their observation post behind a fallen log, its bark providing natural camouflage and a stable platform for their spotting scopes. Marcus set up his equipment with practiced efficiency, adjusting his scope and testing his range-finding equipment. Elena took a different approach, first studying the terrain through her naked eye, looking for patterns and anomalies that might indicate the presence of targets. "You're not going to see anything without optics," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying a note of condescension. "The targets are specifically designed to be difficult to spot." Elena nodded but continued her visual scan. Her grandfather had taught her that the human eye was still the most sophisticated optical instrument available, capable of detecting movement and patterns that technology might miss. She had learned to trust her instincts, to notice the things that didn't belong in the natural environment. After 10 minutes of observation, she spotted the first target. It was a mannequin dressed in camouflage, positioned behind a tree approximately 700 yards away. The figure was well concealed, but something about its posture was wrong, too rigid and unnatural for a living person. She pointed it out to Marcus, who initially dismissed her observation, but eventually confirmed it through his spotting scope. "Good eye," he admitted grudgingly. "I wouldn't have seen that for another few minutes." They continued their observation, methodically scanning their assigned sector for additional targets. Elena found herself falling into a rhythm, her eyes moving in overlapping patterns across the terrain. She spotted 2 more targets before Marcus located his first, each one requiring patience and careful observation to identify. As the exercise progressed, Marcus began to rely more on her observations, asking her to scan specific areas where he suspected targets might be located. Elena found herself enjoying the work, the careful attention to detail, and the satisfaction of solving visual puzzles. This was hunting on a different level, requiring the same patience and observation skills, but applied to a tactical situation. Near the end of the exercise, Elena noticed movement in an area they had already cleared. A figure in camouflage was moving slowly through the trees, so carefully that it would have been invisible to casual observation. She watched for several minutes, confirming that it was indeed a human being rather than a target, then pointed it out to Marcus. "That's an instructor," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying new respect. "They're testing to see if we can spot them moving through our sector." "That's advanced observation, the kind of thing they usually don't test until the 2nd week." Elena said nothing, but she felt a quiet satisfaction at having met the challenge. She had learned to hunt in terrain where movement was everything, where the difference between success and failure often came down to seeing the other party before they saw you. The skills were transferable, even if the context was different. When the exercise ended, they returned to the main building for debriefing. Master Sergeant Kane reviewed their performance with the clinical detachment of someone who had evaluated thousands of soldiers. Elena and Marcus had identified all the targets in their sector, plus the moving instructor, earning them a rating of exceeds expectations. Good work, Kane said, his eyes meeting Elena's for a moment. Both of you demonstrated the patience and attention to detail that this job requires. That evening, Elena found herself included in the group discussions for the first time. Her performance during the observation exercise had earned her a measure of respect from her fellow candidates, and even David Walsh seemed less hostile toward her. The conversations were still dominated by discussions of previous training and combat experience, but she was no longer completely excluded. Sarah Thompson sat beside her during dinner, their conversation ranging from the day's training to their respective backgrounds. Elena learned that Sarah had grown up in a military family, with a father who had served in the Special Forces and a brother who was currently deployed overseas. Her path to the sniper school had been more direct than Elena's, but she had still faced skepticism and discrimination along the way. The thing about this job, Sarah said as they walked back to the barracks, is that it's ultimately about results. You can have all the credentials in the world, but if you can't make the shot when it matters, none of it counts. Elena nodded, understanding the truth in those words. She had always been more comfortable with actions than words, preferring to prove herself through performance rather than credentials. The sniper school was giving her the opportunity to do exactly that, to demonstrate that her unconventional background had prepared her for this challenge in ways that traditional training might not. The third day brought their first long-range shooting exercise with targets placed at distances from 400 to 800 yards. Elena felt a familiar excitement as she prepared her equipment, the anticipation of testing her skills at greater distances than she had ever attempted before. The morning was clear and cold, with a light wind that would require careful attention to environmental factors. Elena studied the range flags, noting the direction and intensity of the wind at various distances. She made notes on her data card, recording temperature, barometric pressure, and humidity readings that would affect her bullet's trajectory. Her first target was at 400 yards, a standard bullseye that looked deceptively small through her scope. Elena settled into her shooting position, her body finding the natural alignment that had become second nature. She made her elevation adjustment, calculated the wind drift, and fired her first shot. The bullet struck just left of center, a result that indicated her wind calculation had been slightly off. She made a minor adjustment and fired again. This time the shot was closer, and her third round found the center of the bull's eye. She continued firing, each shot building on the lessons learned from the previous one. At 600 yards, the targets became more challenging. The bullseye appeared smaller, and the environmental factors became more significant. Elena found herself drawing on everything she had learned, both from her grandfather's informal instruction and from the technical knowledge she had absorbed in the classroom. Her shooting was steady and consistent, each group tight and well-centered. She was not the fastest shooter on the line, but her results were among the best. When the scores were posted, Elena found herself in third place overall, behind only Sarah Thompson and James Rodriguez. Master Sergeant Kane addressed the group after the exercise, his tone serious and evaluative. Some of you are beginning to understand what this job requires. Others are still learning. The distances will increase, the conditions will become more challenging, and the pressure will intensify. Those who cannot adapt will be eliminated. His eyes swept across the group, pausing briefly on each candidate. When his gaze reached Elena, she thought she detected a slight nod of acknowledgement, but it was too subtle to be certain. The afternoon brought classroom instruction on advanced shooting techniques, including shooting from unconventional positions and engaging multiple targets. Elena absorbed the information eagerly, recognizing that these skills would separate the competent shooters from the truly exceptional ones. That evening, she practiced dry-firing exercises in the barracks, working on her trigger control and breathing techniques. The other candidates were engaged in their own training routines, some cleaning equipment, others studying technical manuals. The atmosphere was becoming more focused and intense as the program progressed. Elena was interrupted by a knock on her door. She opened it to find Master Sergeant Kane standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. He was not in uniform, wearing instead a simple gray sweatshirt and jeans that made him appear more approachable than usual. "Walk with me," he said, and Elena followed him outside into the cool evening air. They walked in silence for several minutes, following a path that led away from the main buildings toward a small pond that reflected the evening sky. Kane's pace was unhurried, and Elena sensed that he was choosing his words carefully. "I've been reviewing your file," he said finally. "Your background is different from most of the candidates we see here." Elena nodded, unsure how to respond. "Yes, sir." "No formal shooting training. No military experience beyond basic training. No combat deployment." Kane paused, watching a duck land on the pond surface. "But your performance so far has been solid, consistent, professional." They continued walking, the silence stretching between them. Elena waited for him to continue, sensing that there was more to this conversation than a simple performance review. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, Kane said. "I've trained hundreds of snipers, and I've learned to recognize certain qualities that can't be taught in a classroom. Patience, discipline, the ability to remain calm under pressure. These are things that come from character, not from training." Elena felt a flutter of pride at his words, but she kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate that, sir." "Don't misunderstand me," Kane continued. "Character alone isn't enough. You need technical skills, tactical knowledge, and the ability to make decisions under extreme stress. But without the foundation of character, all the training in the world won't make you a sniper." They had reached the edge of the pond, and Kane stopped walking. In the fading light, his face was hard to read, but his voice carried a note of warning. "Some of your fellow candidates are beginning to see you as a threat. They've invested a lot in the idea that this job requires a certain type of person, and your success challenges that assumption. The training is going to get harder, and some of them might try to make it even harder for you." Elena nodded, remembering Sarah Thompson's similar warning. "I understand, sir." "I hope you do. Because what's coming next is going to test everything you think you know about shooting. We're moving to extended range targets, adverse weather conditions, and high pressure scenarios. This is where we separate the snipers from the marksmen." Kane turned to face her directly, his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her want to step back. "I'm not going to give you any special treatment. You'll succeed or fail based on your own abilities. But I wanted you to know that I've seen something in you that's worth developing if you're willing to do the work." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I am, sir." "Good, because tomorrow we start the real training." The fourth week of training arrived with a storm system that turned the mountains into a fortress of wind and rain. Elena woke to the sound of precipitation hammering against the barracks windows, each drop carrying the promise of miserable conditions ahead. The other candidates moved with the sluggish reluctance of people who knew their day was about to become significantly more difficult. Master Sergeant Kane stood before them in the briefing room, water still dripping from his rain gear despite having been inside for several minutes. His expression carried the satisfied look of someone who thrived on adverse conditions, and Elena knew immediately that the weather would not postpone their training. "Gentlemen and ladies, Kane began, his voice cutting through the sound of rain against the windows. "Today you will learn why we train in all conditions. The enemy does not check the weather forecast before planning an attack, and neither will you when the time comes to stop them." He gestured toward the windows where sheets of rain obscured the view of the training ranges. Visibility is reduced to less than 400 yards. Wind gusts are reaching 30 miles per hour with unpredictable direction changes. Temperature is 38 degrees and falling. These are the conditions that separate professionals from hobbyists. Elena felt a familiar tightness in her stomach, the same sensation she had experienced before challenging shots during her youth in Arizona. Her grandfather had never let weather stop their training sessions, often taking her out in dust storms and desert winds that made accurate shooting seem impossible. Those lessons had taught her that adverse conditions were not obstacles to overcome, but variables to account for and adapt to. "Your target today is at 1,000 yards, Kane continued, and Elena heard several candidates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Standard silhouette target. You will have 1 hour to study the conditions, make your calculations, and engage. Each of you will fire 3 rounds. The passing score is 2 hits. Marcus Chun raised his hand, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Sir, with these wind conditions and reduced visibility, isn't 1,000 yards excessive for this stage of training?" Kane's smile was cold and predatory. "Excessive, Chun? Tell that to the Taliban sniper who engaged American forces from 1,200 yards during a sandstorm in Afghanistan. Tell that to the insurgent who killed 3 Marines from 800 yards during a thunderstorm in Iraq. The enemy will not give you ideal conditions, so neither will I." Elena found herself thinking about the technical challenges they would face. At 1,000 yards, even a slight miscalculation in wind drift could result in a complete miss. The reduced visibility would make reading the wind flags nearly impossible, forcing them to rely on other indicators. The cold temperature would affect their ammunition's velocity, requiring adjustments to their elevation settings. Sarah Thompson leaned over and whispered, "This is where people start failing. The combination of distance, weather, and pressure breaks more candidates than any other exercise." Elena nodded, understanding the implicit warning. This would be her first real test at extreme range, and failure here could mark the beginning of the end for her time in the program. She had performed well at shorter distances, but 1,000 yards was a different proposition entirely. The walk to the range was a miserable affair, with rain driving horizontally across the valley and soaking through even the best waterproof gear. Elena's rifle case was slick with moisture, and she had to wipe her hands frequently to maintain a secure grip. The other candidates moved in a tight group, heads down against the wind, their conversation reduced to shouted fragments. Range Echo was an elevated position that overlooked a valley where targets could be placed at extreme distances. The firing line consisted of covered positions that provided some protection from the elements, but still allowed the wind to affect bullet trajectories. Elena claimed a position near the center of the line and began setting up her equipment with methodical care. Her rifle emerged from its case dry and pristine, the protective covering having done its job during the trek through the storm. She attached her bipod and settled behind the scope, immediately noting how the rain affected visibility through the optics. The target at 1,000 yards was barely visible as a dark shape against the gray background, its silhouette wavering in the wind and precipitation. Elena began her environmental assessment, but the traditional methods of reading wind conditions were useless in the current weather. The flags hung heavy with rain, their movement more influenced by the weight of water than by air currents. She had to rely on other indicators, watching the movement of rain itself and feeling the pressure changes against her exposed skin. David Walsh was struggling with his equipment 2 positions to her left, his movements increasingly frantic as he tried to achieve a stable shooting position. His rifle was not cooperating with the wet conditions, and Elena could hear him muttering curses under his breath. She felt a moment of sympathy for him, understanding how the adverse conditions could overwhelm someone who was already operating at the edge of their abilities. 20 minutes into their preparation time, Elena heard the distinctive crack of a rifle firing. She looked down the line to see James Rodriguez celebrating what appeared to be a successful shot. Through her spotting scope, she could see an impact mark on the target, though it was difficult to determine exactly where the bullet had struck. "First blood to Rodriguez," someone called out, and Elena heard scattered applause from the observation area where the eliminated candidates watched their former classmates continue the program. Elena returned to her own preparation, refusing to be rushed by the pressure of others' success. She had learned from her grandfather that haste was the enemy of precision, and she would rather take the full hour to prepare one perfect shot than rush into 3 attempts that might all miss. She studied the terrain between her position and the target, looking for indicators that might help her read the wind patterns. A stand of pine trees halfway to the target showed branches moving in a specific pattern, and she used that information to estimate wind direction and velocity at the middle distance. Closer to the target, she could see rain being driven at an angle that suggested the wind was stronger and more consistent than it appeared from her position. Marcus Chun fired his first shot 30 minutes into the exercise, and Elena saw through her scope that his bullet had impacted low and left of the target. He made adjustments and fired again, this time achieving what appeared to be a hit. His third shot was also successful, and he stood up from his position with obvious relief. Sarah Thompson was taking a more methodical approach, spending nearly 40 minutes in preparation before firing her first shot. Elena watched her technique with professional interest, noting how she adjusted her body position to compensate for the wind, and how she controlled her breathing despite the cold conditions. Her first shot was a clean hit, center mass on the target. With 15 minutes remaining, Elena had completed her calculations and was ready to engage. She had estimated the wind at 8 miles per hour from the left, gusting to 12, with a temperature effect that would drop her bullet approximately 6 inches at 1,000 yards. She dialed in her corrections and settled into her final shooting position. The crosshairs wavered slightly in the wind, and Elena used her breathing to steady them. She had learned to time her shots with her natural respiratory pause, the moment between heartbeats when her body was most stable. The trigger broke cleanly, and she watched through her scope as the bullet traced its arc across the valley. The impact was clearly visible, a puff of dust and debris from the target frame. Elena had achieved a solid hit, though not perfectly. Centered, she made a minor adjustment for wind and prepared for her second shot. This time the bullet struck closer to center, confirming her environmental calculations. Her third shot was fired with complete confidence. The wind had remained consistent, her rifle was shooting accurately, and her technique was sound. The bullet found its mark with precision, completing a group that would have been respectable under ideal conditions, let alone in the current weather. As the exercise concluded, Elena felt a quiet satisfaction at having met the challenge. She had not been the fastest to complete the course, but her results were solid and demonstrated the kind of consistency that Kane valued. Around her, other candidates were experiencing varying degrees of success and failure. David Walsh had missed all 3 of his shots, his frustration evident in his body language as he packed his equipment. 2 other candidates had achieved only 1 hit each, leaving them on the edge of elimination. Elena realized that the group was being winnowed down with each exercise, the pressure and difficulty level combining to reveal who had the temperament for the specialized role. The debrief was conducted in a heated classroom where the candidates could dry their equipment and warm themselves. Kane reviewed each shooter's performance with clinical precision, offering technical corrections and noting areas for improvement. When he reached Elena's results, he paused for a moment before speaking. Vasquez demonstrated patience and systematic preparation, 3 hits at 1,000 yards in adverse conditions is solid performance. However, her group size suggests room for improvement in wind reading techniques. Elena accepted the feedback without comment, recognizing that Kane was right about her wind calculations. She had been successful, but there was clearly more to learn about reading environmental conditions at extreme range. That evening, the remaining candidates gathered in the common room to discuss the day's exercise. The mood was subdued, with everyone aware that several of their colleagues would likely be eliminated based on their performance. Elena found herself included in the technical discussions for the first time, with even Marcus Cheen asking for her opinion on wind reading techniques. "How did you judge the wind direction at the target?" Sarah Thompson asked. "I couldn't get a reliable reading from the flags." Elena described her method of using terrain features and rain patterns to estimate environmental conditions. The other candidates listened with interest, and she realized that her unconventional background had given her observational skills that complemented their more formal training. "That's field craft," James Rodriguez commented. "Most of us learn to rely on instruments and formal wind reading techniques. You're using natural indicators." Elena nodded, understanding that her approach was different, but not necessarily better or worse than theirs. "My grandfather taught me to read the environment like a hunter. The animals can't use weather instruments, so they have to depend on what they can see and feel." The conversation continued late into the evening, with the candidates sharing techniques and perspectives that reflected their diverse backgrounds. Elena found herself feeling more accepted than at any point since arriving at the school, her performance having earned her a place in the group's informal hierarchy. The following morning brought news that 3 candidates had been eliminated based on their performance during the storm exercise. David Walsh was among them, his consistent struggles finally resulting in his dismissal from the program. Elena watched him pack his equipment with mixed emotions, feeling sympathy for his disappointment while recognizing that the standards existed for important reasons. Master Sergeant Kane addressed the remaining 9 candidates with his usual directness. "You have survived the first phase of training. The exercises will now focus on advanced techniques and tactical applications. Some of you will discover that being able to hit a target is not the same as being able to function as a sniper in a combat environment." The next phase of training introduced urban sniper techniques, including shooting from elevated positions and engaging targets in complex environments. Elena found these exercises challenging in new ways, requiring her to adapt her shooting skills to unconventional positions and backgrounds. The urban training facility was a mock city constructed specifically for sniper training, complete with multi-story buildings, vehicles, and realistic target scenarios. Elena and the other candidates were required to navigate through the environment, establish shooting positions, and engage targets that might appear at any moment. Elena's first assignment was to establish an overwatch position in a 3-story building and provide security for a simulated patrol moving through the streets below. She climbed to the roof and set up her rifle behind a low wall that provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform. The scenario began with the patrol moving normally through the street, but Elena's job was to scan for potential threats and be ready to engage hostile targets. She spent 2 hours in position, her eyes constantly moving across the environment, looking for anything that didn't belong. When the first target appeared, a figure with a weapon in a 2nd-story window across the street, Elena had less than 5 seconds to identify the threat, range it, and engage. Her shot was clean and immediate, demonstrating the kind of quick decision-making that combat situations would require. The exercise continued with multiple target presentations, each one testing different aspects of urban sniper craft. Elena had to engage targets at varying distances, in different lighting conditions, and while maintaining awareness of the friendly patrol below. It was mentally exhausting work that required constant vigilance and split-second decision-making. By the end of the exercise, Elena felt drained but satisfied with her performance. She had successfully engaged all assigned targets while avoiding any shots that might have endangered friendly forces. The feedback from Kane was positive, noting her ability to maintain situational awareness while delivering accurate fire. Sarah Thompson had performed equally well, her military experience evident in her tactical decision-making and target prioritization. Marcus Chen had struggled with the time pressure, missing 2 targets because he had taken too long to identify and engage them. The urban training continued for a week, with increasingly complex scenarios that tested every aspect of sniper skills. Elena found herself adapting well to the demands, her natural patience and observation skills serving her well in environments that required careful study and quick action. On the final day of urban training, Kane announced a special exercise that would test their abilities under extreme pressure. The candidates would be required to engage a series of targets while being observed by their instructors and fellow students, with their performance being broadcast live to the observation room. This exercise simulates the pressure of an actual combat situation, Kane explained. You will be required to engage 5 targets at distances ranging from 200 to 800 yards, in a specific sequence within a time limit of 10 minutes. Failure to engage any target or engaging them out of sequence results in immediate elimination from the program. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she contemplated the challenge. This was different from the previous exercises which had tested individual skills in isolation. This exercise would require her to integrate everything she had learned while performing under the kind of pressure that could break even experienced shooters. The candidates drew lots to determine the order of performance, and Elena found herself assigned to go 4th out of the 9 remaining students. She would have the advantage of observing others' techniques, but also the pressure of knowing that any mistakes would be witnessed by everyone. Marcus Chen went first, his movements quick and confident as he engaged the targets in the prescribed sequence. His shooting was technically sound, but Elena could see the tension in his body language. As he worked against the clock, he successfully engaged 4 of the 5 targets before running out of time, his elimination from the program confirmed by his failure to complete the exercise. Sarah Thompson performed next, her approach more methodical and controlled. She took time to ensure each shot was properly aimed before moving to the next target, her military training evident in her systematic approach. She completed the exercise with 30 seconds to spare, earning congratulations from Kane and the other instructors. The third candidate, James Rodriguez, attempted to rush through the exercise and made a critical error in target sequence, engaging the 4th target before the 3rd. His elimination was immediate and final, despite his protests that the error had been minor. Elena's turn arrived with 6 candidates remaining and the pressure mounting. She approached the firing line with deliberate calm, her mind focused on the task ahead rather than the consequences of failure. She had practiced target transitions extensively, and she trusted her preparation and instincts. The first target appeared at 200 yards, a standard silhouette that she engaged quickly and accurately. The second target was at 400 yards, requiring a more careful aim point, but still within her comfort zone. She made the shot cleanly and immediately began scanning for the third target. The third target was partially concealed behind cover at 600 yards, requiring her to wait for it to expose itself before engaging. Elena controlled her breathing and waited patiently, her crosshairs steady on the area where the target would appear. When it moved into the open, she fired immediately, achieving a solid hit. The fourth target was the most challenging, a moving silhouette at 800 yards that crossed her field of view for only a few seconds. Elena had practiced this type of shot extensively, learning to lead moving targets and time her shot for maximum probability of hit. Her bullet found its mark just as the target disappeared behind cover. The final target was back at close range, 300 yards, but positioned in such a way that she had to change her shooting position to engage it. Elena moved quickly but carefully, re-establishing her shooting stance and engaging the target. With precision. The exercise was complete with nearly 2 minutes remaining on the clock. Kane's evaluation was brief but positive. Vasquez demonstrated excellent time management and target prioritization. Her shooting was accurate and decisive throughout the exercise. Elena felt a surge of relief and satisfaction as she realized she had successfully completed one of the most challenging tests of the program. Around her, the other candidates offered congratulations, their respect evident in their voices and expressions. 2 more candidates successfully completed the exercise, while 1 failed due to poor time management. The group was now reduced to 6 members, and Elena realized she had survived longer in the program than many people had expected. She was no longer the outsider struggling to prove herself, but a legitimate contender for graduation. That evening, Kane called Elena aside for another private conversation. They walked to the same pond where they had talked weeks earlier, the water now reflecting the last light of evening. Kane's expression was thoughtful as he chose his words carefully. "You've exceeded my expectations," he said without preamble. "When you first arrived here, I wasn't sure you had the background necessary for this program. I was wrong." Elena nodded, accepting the compliment while remaining focused on what lay ahead. "Thank you, sir, but we're not finished yet." "No, we're not. What's coming next is the final phase of training, and it's designed to test everything you've learned under the most realistic conditions possible. Some of the candidates who have made it this far will still fail, because being able to shoot accurately is not the same as being able to function as a sniper in combat." Kane paused, watching a fish jump in the center of the pond. "The final exercise is a field problem that will last 3 days. You'll be given a mission that requires you to infiltrate an area, establish a hide site, and engage targets under realistic conditions. You'll be hunted by opposing forces, you'll have to survive on limited supplies, and you'll have to make decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and failure." Elena listened carefully, understanding that this final test would determine whether she graduated from the program or returned to her regular unit, with the knowledge that she had come close but not quite succeeded. "I want you to know that you've already proven yourself in many ways," Kane continued. "But the final exercise is where we separate the graduates from the near misses. It's where we find out who has what it takes to carry the title of sniper." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I'm ready, sir." Kane smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression seemed genuinely warm. "I believe you are. But remember, being ready and being successful are not always the same thing. Stay focused, trust your training, and don't let the pressure make you do anything stupid." As they walked back toward the barracks, Elena felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She had come further than anyone had expected, including herself, but the ultimate test was still ahead. Everything she had learned, everything she had proven, would be meaningless if she failed in the final exercise. The remaining candidates spent their last evening before the field exercise in quiet preparation, checking equipment and reviewing technical procedures. Elena found herself thinking about her grandfather, wishing she could tell him about how far she had come and how much his lessons had meant to her success. She cleaned her rifle one more time, the familiar routine helping to calm her nerves and focus her mind on the challenge ahead. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of her abilities, and she was determined to prove that the quiet girl from Arizona deserved to wear the title of sniper. The helicopter lifted off at dawn, its rotors chopping through the crisp mountain air as it carried the 6 remaining candidates toward their final destination. Elena sat in the cramped passenger compartment, her equipment secured between her knees and her mind focused on the mission briefing she had memorized the night before. Around her, the other survivors of the program sat in similar silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The landscape below rolled past, in shades of green and brown, dense forest broken by rocky outcroppings and narrow valleys that could hide 1,000 secrets. Elena studied the terrain through the small window beside her, noting potential approach routes and areas of concealment that might prove useful in the days ahead. This was enemy territory now, at least for the purposes of the exercise, and every piece of information could make the difference between success and failure. Master Sergeant Kane sat across from her, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. He had said little during the flight, but Elena could feel his attention on each of the candidates as they prepared for what he had called the ultimate test of their abilities. The final exercise would determine who graduated from the program, and who returned to their units with the knowledge that they had come close, but not quite made the grade. The mission briefing had been comprehensive, but deliberately vague in certain areas, forcing the candidates to make their own tactical decisions based on incomplete information. Elena's assigned target was a high-value individual who would be moving through a specific area during a narrow time window. She would have to infiltrate the operational zone, establish a concealed position, and eliminate the target with a single shot at a distance exceeding 1,500 yards. The challenge was complicated by the presence of opposing forces who would be actively hunting for infiltrators. Elena would have to avoid detection while moving through hostile territory, establish a hide site that could remain undetected for up to 48 hours, and then execute her mission under conditions that would test every skill she had learned during the program. Sarah Thompson sat beside her, her face set in lines of concentration as she reviewed her own mission parameters. Each candidate had been given a different target and operational area, ensuring that they could not rely on teamwork or shared intelligence to complete their assignments. This was an individual test, a final evaluation of each person's ability to function as a lone operator in hostile territory. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, a small clearing surrounded by dense forest that would provide the candidates with their insertion point. Elena checked her equipment one final time, ensuring that everything was properly secured and easily accessible. Her rifle was broken down and packed in a specially designed case that would allow her to carry it without creating an obvious signature. Her other gear included a ghillie suit, minimal rations for 3 days, water purification tablets, and a radio for emergency communication only. The aircraft touched down with barely a bump, and the candidates filed out quickly while the rotors continued to turn. Elena felt the downdraft from the blades pressing against her back as she moved away from the landing zone. And within seconds, the helicopter was lifting off again, leaving them alone in the wilderness with only their skills and equipment to rely upon. Kane's voice carried clearly over the sound of the departing aircraft. Your operational period begins now. You have 72 hours to complete your missions and reach your extraction points. Remember, this is as close to real combat conditions as we can simulate without actually shooting at you. The opposing forces have been instructed to treat this as a serious exercise, and they will be using every resource at their disposal to locate and neutralize you. Elena shouldered her pack and checked her compass bearing one final time before moving into the forest. Her route to the operational area would take her through 12 miles of mountainous terrain, most of it heavily forested with limited visibility and numerous opportunities for both concealment and ambush. She had studied topographic maps of the area extensively, but she knew that maps could only tell part of the story. The forest was alive with the sounds of wildlife and wind through the trees, natural noise that would help mask her movement, but might also conceal the approach of opposing forces. Elena moved carefully but deliberately, using game trails when possible and avoiding areas where her passage might leave obvious sign. Her grandfather had taught her to move through the desert like a ghost, and those same principles applied here despite the different terrain. After 2 hours of steady movement, Elena paused at the edge of a small clearing to study the area ahead. Her route would take her through a narrow valley that offered good concealment, but limited escape routes if she encountered enemy forces. She spent 10 minutes observing the area through her binoculars, looking for any sign of human presence or surveillance before committing to the crossing. The valley proved to be unoccupied, but Elena noticed fresh tire tracks in the muddy bottom that suggested vehicle patrols had been through the area recently. She made note of the information and adjusted her route to avoid the obvious travel corridors that opposing forces might be monitoring. The exercise was designed to test her ability to think tactically as well as shoot accurately, and every decision she made could affect the outcome of her mission. By midday, Elena had covered half the distance to her operational area without encountering any opposition. She paused for a brief rest and a small meal, choosing a position that offered good visibility in all directions while providing concealment from aerial observation. The rations were bland but nutritious, designed to provide energy without requiring cooking or creating obvious waste. As she ate, Elena reviewed her mission timeline and considered the challenges that lay ahead. Her target would be traveling through the assigned area sometime between 18 and 24 hours from now, giving her a window of opportunity that required precise timing and positioning. She would need to reach her chosen hide site, construct adequate concealment, and prepare her shooting position well in advance of the target's arrival. The afternoon brought her first contact with opposing forces, the distant sound of voices and vehicle engines that indicated a patrol moving through the area ahead of her. Elena immediately went to ground, using the natural concealment of fallen logs and dense undergrowth to avoid detection. She could hear the patrol clearly now, at least 6 people moving with the casual confidence of those who believed they controlled the area. Elena remained motionless for 20 minutes after the voices faded, ensuring that no trailing elements or observers had been left behind. When she finally resumed movement, she chose a route that would take her well away from the patrols line of march, accepting the additional time and distance required to maintain security. The encounter served as a reminder that the opposing forces were taking their role seriously, and Elena adjusted her tactics accordingly. She moved more carefully now, taking time to observe each area before entering it and choosing routes that offered multiple escape options if she was discovered. Late in the afternoon, Elena reached the edge of her operational area, a mountainous region that overlooked the valley where her target would appear. She spent an hour studying the terrain through her binoculars, identifying potential shooting positions and approaches that would allow her to establish an effective hide site. The shot would be challenging, even under ideal conditions, with the target moving through an area that offered only brief windows of opportunity. Elena selected a position on a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility over the target area while offering natural concealment and multiple escape routes. The location was approximately 1,600 yards from where intelligence indicated the target would appear, well within the range of her rifle, but requiring precise calculation of environmental factors to ensure a successful shot. As darkness fell, Elena began the careful process of establishing her hide site. She had brought a pre-made ghillie suit that would help her blend with the natural vegetation, but the real concealment would come from careful positioning and disciplined fieldcraft. She cleared a small area behind the rocks, removing any debris that might create noise or reveal her presence, and arranged natural materials to break up the outline of her position. The work was painstaking and physically demanding, requiring her to move slowly and deliberately to avoid creating any sign that might be detected by opposing forces. Elena had learned during her childhood hunting trips that patience was often more important than skill, and she applied that lesson now as she prepared for what might be the most important shot of her military career. By midnight, her hide site was complete, and Elena settled in for her first period of observation and rest. She would maintain a watch schedule that allowed her to monitor the area while conserving energy for the critical period ahead. The night was cold but clear, with enough starlight to provide reasonable visibility across the valley below. Elena used the quiet hours to review her shooting calculations and prepare her equipment for the moment when her target would appear. The distance to the shooting location required careful consideration of bullet drop, wind drift, and atmospheric conditions that could affect her projectile's flight path. She had calculated the basic ballistics during her mission planning, but the final adjustments would have to be made based on real-time environmental conditions. The second day began with Elena conducting a detailed reconnaissance of her target area through her spotting scope. She noted wind patterns, lighting conditions, and potential obstacles that might affect her shot or provide concealment for opposing forces. The intelligence briefing had indicated that her target would be traveling in a vehicle convoy, but the specific composition and timing remained uncertain. During the morning, Elena observed two separate patrols moving through the valley below, their routes and timing suggesting a deliberate pattern designed to detect infiltrators. She made careful notes of their movements and schedules, information that might prove useful if she needed to escape the area after completing her mission. The waiting was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the exercise, requiring Elena to remain alert and ready while dealing with the physical discomfort of maintaining a concealed position for extended periods. Her grandfather had taught her that hunting was 90% waiting and 10% action, but that the quality of the waiting often determined the success of the action. Elena used meditation techniques she had learned to manage stress and maintain focus during the long hours of observation. She visualized the shot sequence repeatedly, mentally rehearsing every aspect of target acquisition, range estimation, and trigger control that would be required when the moment came. Late in the afternoon of the second day, Elena detected increased radio traffic and vehicle movement in the valley below. Through her spotting scope, she could see additional security forces taking positions at key points throughout the area, their deployment suggesting that something significant was about to occur. Elena checked her rifle one final time and settled into her shooting position, knowing that her target's arrival was imminent. The convoy appeared exactly where intelligence had predicted, a line of 3 vehicles moving at moderate speed through the valley. Elena identified the target vehicle immediately, a black sedan traveling in the center of the formation with obvious security escorts. Through her scope, she could see the outline of figures inside the vehicle, but she would need to wait for the right moment to identify and engage her specific target. The vehicles followed the predicted route, moving through a series of curves that would provide Elena with several potential shooting opportunities. She tracked their progress through her scope, noting their speed and the timing intervals between potential engagement points. The shot would have to be taken during a specific window, when the target vehicle would be in the open and moving in a predictable direction. Elena controlled her breathing and settled her crosshairs on the point where the target vehicle would appear in approximately 30 seconds. The range was challenging but well within her capabilities, and the environmental conditions were as favorable as she could expect. Wind was minimal and consistent, temperature was stable, and visibility was excellent despite the late afternoon light. The target vehicle emerged from behind a stand of trees exactly on schedule, and Elena immediately began her final target identification process. Through her scope, she could see the passenger in the rear seat of the sedan, a figure that matched the description provided in her mission briefing. This was her target, and she had perhaps 10 seconds to make the shot before the vehicle disappeared behind another terrain feature. Elena applied steady pressure to her trigger while maintaining perfect sight alignment on her target. The rifle fired with a clean break that sent the bullet arcing across the valley toward its destination 1,600 yards away. Through her scope, Elena watched the projectile's impact and confirmed that her shot had been successful, striking the target precisely where she had aimed. The effect on the convoy was immediate and dramatic, with the escort vehicles accelerating rapidly. While the target vehicle came to an abrupt stop, Elena could see security personnel deploying from the other vehicles and beginning immediate action procedures to secure the area and identify the source of the attack. Elena began her extraction procedures immediately, knowing that opposing forces would be converging on her general location within minutes. She quickly broke down her shooting position and packed her essential equipment, leaving behind anything that might slow her movement through the forest. The successful completion of her mission meant nothing if she was captured during the escape phase of the operation. Moving carefully but quickly through the darkness, Elena followed a pre-planned escape route that would take her away from the most likely search areas. She could hear helicopters in the distance and see searchlights probing the mountainsides. Clear evidence that the opposing forces were conducting an intensive effort to locate her position. The extraction took her through terrain that tested every aspect of her fieldcraft training, requiring her to move silently through dense forest while avoiding the search teams that seemed to be everywhere. Elena used every technique her grandfather had taught her about moving unseen through hostile territory, staying off obvious trails and using natural features to mask her movement. After 6 hours of careful movement through the darkness, Elena reached her designated extraction point, a small clearing where she would wait for pickup. She had successfully completed her mission and evaded the pursuing forces, demonstrating the complete range of skills that the sniper program was designed to develop. The helicopter that retrieved her carried several other candidates who had also completed their missions successfully. Sarah Thompson was among them, her expression showing the same mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction that Elena felt. They had survived the ultimate test and proven themselves worthy of graduation from one of the military's most demanding programs. Master Sergeant Kane was waiting for them when they returned to the training facility, his expression revealing nothing of his assessment of their performance. Elena knew that the final evaluation would be based not just on mission completion, but on how well each candidate had demonstrated the full range of sniper skills during the exercise. The formal debrief took place the following morning, with each candidate required to present a detailed account of their mission execution and tactical decision-making. Elena described her infiltration route, hide site construction, target engagement, and extraction procedures, answering technical questions about her choices and explaining the reasoning behind her actions. Kane's evaluation was characteristically direct and thorough. Vasquez demonstrated excellent fieldcraft throughout the exercise. Her infiltration was undetected, her hide site was well constructed and effectively concealed, and her shot placement was precise. She successfully completed all mission objectives and evaded opposing forces during extraction. Elena felt a surge of pride at the positive assessment, but she maintained her composure while Kane continued his evaluation of the other candidates. Not everyone had been as successful, and she could see the disappointment in the faces of those who had come close but not quite met the demanding standards of the program. When the evaluations were complete, Kane addressed the group with uncharacteristic formality. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have completed the most demanding training program the military has to offer. Those of you who have met our standards have earned the right to call yourselves snipers, but that title comes with responsibilities that extend far beyond your individual capabilities." Elena and 3 other candidates had successfully completed all phases of the program and would graduate with full sniper qualification. Sarah Thompson was among the graduates, her military experience and natural ability having carried her through the demanding selection process. The other graduates were James Rodriguez, who had overcome his early struggles to demonstrate consistent performance, and Michael Torres, a quiet professional who had excelled in every phase of training. The graduation ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Elena receiving her sniper badge and the qualification that represented months of intensive training and personal growth. She thought about her grandfather as Kane pinned the badge to her uniform, knowing that he would have been proud to see how far his lessons had carried her. In his final address to the graduates, Kane spoke about the responsibility that came with their new qualification. You are now part of a small community of professionals who possess skills that can change the course of battles and save the lives of your fellow soldiers. That capability comes with the obligation to use it wisely and to maintain the standards that others have established before you. Elena listened to his words with the understanding that her real education was just beginning. The sniper school had taught her the technical skills and tactical knowledge she would need, but applying those skills in actual combat situations would require continued learning and adaptation. After the ceremony, Elena found herself approached by several of her fellow graduates and even some of the candidates who had not completed the program. The respect in their voices and expressions was something she had never experienced before. Acknowledgement of her achievements that went beyond simple congratulations. Marcus Chen, who had been eliminated during the urban training phase, sought her out specifically to offer his assessment of her performance. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "I thought this job required a certain type of background. But you proved that dedication and natural ability matter more than credentials." Elena accepted his words graciously, understanding that it had taken courage for him to acknowledge his initial misjudgment. "We all learn from our experiences," she replied. "That's what makes us better soldiers." Sarah Thompson joined them, her own sniper badge gleaming on her uniform. "So what's next for you?" she asked Elena. Elena considered the question, knowing that her assignment to an operational unit would bring new challenges and opportunities. "Whatever they ask me to do," she said, "I'm ready." That evening, Elena sat alone in her barracks room, packing her equipment and personal belongings for the journey to her new assignment. The rifle that had become such an important part of her life over the past months was carefully secured in its case, ready for whatever missions lay ahead. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, from a small town in Arizona to graduation from one of the military's most elite programs. The path had not been easy, and there had been moments when failure seemed more likely than success, but she had persevered through determination and the lessons learned from a grandfather who had understood the importance of patience, discipline, and quiet confidence. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from her unit assignment officer, providing details about her new posting and the specialized team she would be joining. She would be deployed overseas within the month, where her skills would be tested in real combat situations that would make the training exercises seem simple by comparison. As she prepared for sleep on her final night at the sniper school, Elena reflected on how much she had changed during her time there. She had arrived as an unknown quantity, someone whose unconventional background had made others question whether she belonged in such an elite program. She was leaving as a qualified sniper, someone who had proven that determination and natural ability could overcome any disadvantage in background or experience. The transformation had not been without cost. Elena had been forced to push herself beyond limits she had never tested before, to confront self-doubt and external skepticism while maintaining focus on her goals. She had learned that success in demanding environments required not just technical skill, but mental toughness and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. More importantly, she had discovered that respect was something that had to be earned through performance rather than granted because of credentials or background. The other candidates who had initially dismissed her abilities had come to recognize her competence through direct observation of her skills, and that recognition meant more to her than any formal acknowledgement could have provided. Elena's success at sniper school represented more than just personal achievement. She had demonstrated that the military's most demanding programs could identify and develop talent regardless of where it originated, and that diversity of background could strengthen rather than weaken elite units. Her graduation sent a message to other soldiers who might have unconventional paths to specialized roles, that determination and ability mattered more than traditional qualifications. The final morning at the training facility dawned clear and cold, with the same mountain air that had greeted Elena on her first day months earlier. She loaded her equipment into the transport vehicle that would take her to the airport, taking one last look at the ranges and buildings where she had been transformed from an uncertain candidate into a confident professional, Master Sergeant. Kane was there to see the graduates off, his expression carrying what might have been pride as he shook hands with each of them. When he reached Elena, he paused for a moment before speaking. "You surprised a lot of people here," he said quietly, "including me." That shot at 1,600 yards during the final exercise was as good as anything I've seen in 23 years of running this program. Elena met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Kane nodded and handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something to remember us by," he said. "Don't open it until you get to your new unit." The transport vehicle pulled away from the facility, with Elena watching the buildings disappear behind them. She had arrived at sniper school as Private First Class Elena Vasquez, a soldier with potential but little to distinguish her from thousands of others. She was leaving as a qualified sniper, someone whose skills had been tested and proven under the most demanding conditions the military could create. The package from Kane remained unopened in her lap as the vehicle carried her toward her new assignment and whatever challenges awaited her there. Elena knew that graduating from sniper school was just the beginning of her journey as a professional soldier, but she also knew that she had proven to herself and others that she possessed the qualities necessary to succeed in the most demanding situations. Her grandfather's lessons about patience, discipline, and quiet confidence had carried her through the most challenging experience of her life, and they would continue to guide her as she faced whatever missions lay ahead. Elena Vasquez had found her place in the military's elite community, not through connections or credentials, but through the demonstrated ability to perform when performance mattered most. The simple woman who had been mocked and dismissed had become a sniper whose 1,600-yard shot under pressure would be remembered long after the details of the exercise were forgotten. She had proven that true strength came not from matching others' expectations, but from exceeding them through dedication, skill, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of achieving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.